Today we're in a remote part of Arizona, visiting the ruins of a stagecoach station that was the site of a bloody massacre and 2 Civil War era battles where 3 Confederate soldiers never left. Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now I'm in Arizona, about 60 miles or so southeast of Tucson, in the Coronado National Forest. And today we're going to be visiting the ruins of a stagecoach station that had a few interesting historical events happen there. First was the massacre at Dragoon Springs, which led to an incredible tale of survival. And then a few years later, there was a Civil War battle here, but not between the North and the South, between the Confederates and the Apache. Now we should be pretty close to the station right now, so let's head over and take a look and see what there is to see. Right now we're a few miles south of the town of Dragoon. To get here from the town, the first part of the drive was through state trust land, then we entered the national forest. The road was a little rough at points, but nothing too bad. The stage station that we're heading to was built as a station on the Butterfield Overland Mail route, and was one of 2 fortified stations in Arizona. The reason for the fortification was because of the Apache. The Dragoon Mountains, which are to our right, were a stronghold for the Chiricahua Apache, and was almost an impenetrable fortress for them. The Apache would eventually play a big part in the story of this station, but they weren't involved in the first major event to happen here. And that's what's become known as the Dragoon Springs Massacre. And I could see the walls of the station ahead of us on the other side of the fence. We did come across something on the path over here, but I'll get back to that in a minute. I don't want to start a story at the end. Let's take a closer look and talk about the history of this place. A few minutes after midnight on September 9th, 1858, this was the site of an attack that ended with an incredible tale of survival. If it happened in a movie, people would say the movie is unrealistic. Had we arrived here in late 1858, the walls would have of course been much higher, and there would have been a large wooden gate here at the entrance. The stations for the Butterfield Overland Mail, which was to begin operation later in the month, were still being built in early September 1858. Because of the nearby spring, this was a water stop on earlier stage lines through the area, but construction on the station here didn't begin until August 1858. With this station being nearly complete, a lot of the crew were sent to help finish the station at the San Pedro River, leaving behind only 7 people here. They were Silas St. John, James Burr, William Cunningham, James Lang, and 3 laborers from Mexico named Guadalupe Ramirez, Pablo Ramirez, and Bonifacio Morondo. A large amount of supplies and 8 mules were left at the station as well. With the small staff, the 3 Mexican laborers decided they were going to rob the station, and the best way to do it was to grab their axes and kill everyone here. From the front of the station, on the right here outside of the station, is where James Burr was sleeping on the night of the massacre. He was later found still wrapped in his blankets, with 2 blows to his head, likely killed in his sleep, never knowing anything was going on. Inside the station is where the 3 others slept. I'm trying to get into the station and just ran into these thorns. These could definitely do some damage. Inside the station against this wall is where Lang was sleeping. He also took several axe blows to the head, but he didn't die right away, and would spend the next few days immobilized and in agonizing pain. St. John and Cunningham slept in the 2 rooms at the station. St. John was actually awakened by the sounds of the animals, followed by the sounds of heavy blows, then screams. As soon as St. John jumped out of bed, he was confronted by the attackers. St. John was able to parry the axe blows that came his way with his left arm and rifle. After he managed to fend off the attackers, he dropped his rifle, giving them an opportunity to take another chance at him. During the second fight, St. John managed to grab his 6-shooter, fired 1 shot, and the Mexicans fled. St. John wrapped his wounds as best he could, then laid down here holding his gun and waited for daylight. When the sun came up, St. John found that Burr was dead, and both Cunningham and Lang had massive wounds to their heads and had little chance of survival. Cunningham would die within the day. Lang would make it a few days, but his wounds were fatal as well. St. John wasn't doing too well himself, but the attack was only the beginning of his nightmare. First, the buzzards came. Then came coyotes and wolves. St. John was able to fend them off and stop them from getting to him, but he was helpless to stop them from eating the bodies of his friends. For 4 days, St. John lay at the station with a terrible wound to his arm, with no food or water, fending off wild animals. When help finally arrived at the station, they found 2 of the men dead, Lang near death, and St. John with a massive wound that was now covered with maggots. Another thing that was discovered when help arrived was that the 1 shot St. John got off was effective. The body of one of the attackers, Mirando, was found nearby. The other 2 attackers presumably escaped to Mexico and were never apprehended. Now we're back at what we came across on the path to the station. The 2 station workers who were already dead were buried in one grave here, and then when Lang died the next day, he was buried next to them. Mirando's body was just left to the elements. It took 5 more days for a doctor to get here for St. John, and when the doctor did arrive, all he could do was amputate the arm at the shoulder. The arm is also buried here. St. John was certainly tough. Within 3 weeks, he was back to riding a horse, and later in life, he survived a railroad accident where several people were killed. He lived to the age of 84, dying in San Diego in 1919. From here, this is almost the same view that is in an old drawing of the station, showing how it looked when it was in operation. This station was just used for changing horses. It wasn't a station where people would eat or stay the night. The Butterfield stage line only lasted until 1861 due to the outbreak of the American Civil War. Also in 1861, an 11-year war between the Chiricahua Apache, led by Cochise, and the United States had begun. And that brings us to what is just a little ways from the station's entrance. During the American Civil War, in early 1862, the Confederates occupied Tucson, and on May 5, 1862, a band of Confederates would battle and be defeated by the Chiricahua Apache here in what was to be known as the First Battle of Dragoon Springs. A small group of about 18 Confederate soldiers were transporting Union prisoners to Texas when they ran into a force of about 100 Apache warriors here. In the battle that ensued, 3 Confederate soldiers and a young Mexican stock herder that the Confederates forced into service were killed, making these the westernmost Confederate deaths of the Civil War. No Apache casualties were reported. The Apache also captured 17 horses, 21 mules, and 16 cattle. Only the graves for Sergeant Samuel Ford and the Mexican stock herder named Ricardo are still marked. And Ricardo's grave is very difficult to make out. In the 1960s, these graves were desecrated, likely by somebody who was looking for Civil War items that can end up being quite valuable. I read that Ford's body was completely removed. After the first Battle of Dragoon Springs, where the Confederates were killed and a large amount of livestock was taken, there was a second Battle of Dragoon Springs near here, where the Confederates managed to kill 5 Apache and regain most of their missing livestock. But now, we're going to head about a mile from here to the spring that Dragoon Springs Station is named for. Hopefully this sign leads the right way. We actually ended up just parking. The road got a little too extreme for me. We should be about a quarter mile or so from the spring though. I think I mentioned earlier that these mountains were a stronghold for Cochise and the Chiricahua Apache. Cochise is actually buried in these mountains somewhere in a secret location. As we're walking, I see stuff on the other side of the canyon, probably old mining equipment, but it sure took some determination to get that out here. There's some sort of structure down there. Let's go take a closer look at it. I'm not totally sure what this is or what this was used for. If I had to guess, I would say this was probably used by miners. If you know, let me know in the comments. I'm feeling a little more confident that structure we saw a minute ago is related to mining, because we've just come across a mine shaft. Now I can't see the bottom from up here, but let me stick the camera over the edge. Hopefully we can see the bottom. And it looks like Dragoon Springs is just up ahead of us now. The springs have long since dried out, but this was an essential source of water for countless generations of Apache and for those early stagecoaches. As we go up into the mountains more, here is that canyon below us, and that pointed mountain we could see in the distance from the stage station is getting pretty close. So that's our look at Dragoon Springs Station and the history surrounding it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.